Welcome to Open Range. I'm Perry Schmacher in tonight for Gary Imneth. Tonight we've got Ben Koppelman, legislator from District 16. Ben was on in November and he's back again to educate our audience tonight. I've got some hard questions for him. Ben, how's your winter been?
It's been good. I've got away just enough to not be allergic to the cold. And we've been blessed to not have had a ridiculous amount of snow this year. So I'm thankful.
I was going to ask if you got somewhere warm. Where did you go?
We spent a week in Mexico, and that was before the insanity started.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
good.
Good timing.
And then I was at a couple of work conventions since then. So I was in Orlando and Salt Lake City.
Great. I've got some difficult questions in for you tonight, but I know you're going to answer them to the best of your knowledge and you're going to educate the audience along the way. But we've got a lot to get to, so let's get to it, all right?
All right.
Tonight's show has one major theme. We have a conundrum facing Republicans in our state. The months of January and February have been full of district nominating conventions across uneven numbered districts in our state of North Dakota. This should be a rigorous exercise of debate and policy, but in many instances is exposing a disease I call incumbency. This disease has been around as long as there's been politicians. There's one area, Ben, where competition is not allowed, and that seems to be against an incumbent elected official. It's sacrilege to run against them, it seems, or at least they give that impression. Sometimes everybody has job interviews, and sometimes people even get fired because they do a poor job. But an incumbent seems to break out in hives whenever somebody wants to challenge them for the position they hold. I'm adding a little sarcasm here, Ben, so you give me a little. Anyhow, I want you to explain this to the audience since you're an incumbent. But before you start, I want to tell you an answer I'm not going to accept from you. I'm not going to go with the "I just love to give back to my fellow citizens" response. That may be how it starts, but that's not how it ends. In today's society, virtue is long, long gone. There might be 2 out of 100 in public service that still have it. From where I sit, it is entirely vanity or vice, and/or vice. It is just normal human nature. Labeling serving 10, 15, 20 years as some honorable civic service is pure folly. You are a legislator, and have been for a while. This question has nothing to do with the quality of your service. I just want to know why that attitude seems to exist, where it seems to be a birthright for the incumbent, the position he holds, and they don't want any competition. All I'm asking for is competition. Explain it to me. How long did the disease come to hit you? Did it take 6 months? Did it take a year? How long till that virus infected your system? Or maybe you took the vaccine and you don't have that virus.
Well, if we get into taking vaccines or not, that's a different show. But I would say that from an honest perspective, anyone that's in a position doesn't like to be challenged. It doesn't matter if it's at work or if it's on the playground or the football team or anything else. Challenge for the person being challenged is something that's not desirable. But I think when it comes to public service, politicians basically want to hold on to 3 things. They want to, or at least control three things. It's time, it's money, and it's power. And so when you look at what might corrupt a perspective of a politician, it's those 3 things. I would say as part-time legislators, no matter how long you've served, unless you've got nothing better to do, completely retired or something like that, if you're a business owner, you make a sacrifice for time. And there's no way around that. You make a sacrifice for time, but some sacrifice more time than others. I'll get back to that. Money is the second thing. And this job doesn't pay particularly well if you're comparing it to a day job, right? So money generally would not be the motivation. So then we're left with power. How do people balance power? Do they want to hold on to power? And what I've observed is that those people that get power, particularly if they're a chairman of a committee or if they're a leadership of some type, they think that spot is that they're entitled to that. And I think each of us maybe has a little bit of that feeling to the legislative seat that we've held, if for no other reason, because we've put a lot of effort into maintaining that through elections and through the time we've put in the legislature. Now, to be clear, these seats are the people's seats. They don't belong to any individual. Should a legislator be challenged every single time they run for office? Maybe. I think they definitely need to be challenged on their voting record. and holding their feet to the fire and saying, what good are you doing me? Why should I send you back? I think that's the first challenge that should happen. Then where you build after that is you say, if I'm not happy with that answer, do I find somebody better? And that's a different type of challenge because that's actually somebody running against you. I think in some of these races, people bringing candidates in to run against somebody without really even leveling an accusation as to how well that person served the district. They're not doing it on a principle, they're doing it on personality or for some other purpose. You might actually have the inverse problem where the person bringing the challenger has some political avenue in mind, and that's why they want to bring the challenger. So you have to be a little bit skeptical of that as well. But I think the fact that you're challenging the job someone's doing is fair game and should always be fair game. And I would hope that people would see me being more the 2 in the 100 than the 98 in 100 that want to hold on to that. But let's be clear, we're all human beings and we all bristle a little bit when people say, we think you suck at your job. And then, of course, we're ready to defend ourselves as to why we don't think we suck at our job.
And I appreciate your integrity here. And all I'm calling for is competition. Iron sharpens iron. And whether it's sports, you practice against somebody, stand up for your record, your voting record, stand up to your district members and make the argument in the arena why you think you should serve versus somebody else. Don't be annoyed because you have a challenger. And I agree with you. Some challenges may not be on the up and up. It may be a personal vendetta, things like that. I'm talking about a fair, square fight in the public arena. And I think we both agree that that should be allowed, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Let's go to the next part. Now I want to discuss the square peg in a round hole dilemma facing the Republican Party. As a legislator, correct me here if I misstate something, but I want to kind of lay the rules out for the viewers in case they're not active in their districts. Currently, you have 2 ways to get on a primary ballot. You either get endorsed by your district or you get enough signatures, sometimes as few as a few hundred, to get nominated, which places your name on the primary ballot. Have I misstated anything?
No, that's correct. I think in a lot of districts, it's 500 to 600 signatures.
Okay. So some I've heard it's as low as 150, and that kind of seems small, but okay. Now let's get to a little bit more specific and into the intrigue and political games that are being played. This Republican brand is supposed to stand for something to the people. When you say you're Republican, it has to mean something. We agree on that, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And that is usually the platform it represents, right? That's why the platform is created, so people can look at that and contrast that to an independent or a Democrat and say, this is what a Republican stands for. We're on the same page?
Absolutely. And I think we should clarify that the platform that we're referring to may not be this year's Republican platform that the state party achieved at their convention. We're really talking about the small R Republican platform, which is the guiding principles of our party going all the way back to Abraham Lincoln. Freedom, personal responsibility, the free enterprise, things of that nature, small government, limited government, low taxation. And then, of course, we go down the Bill of Rights and the things where we support our Constitution, like freedom of speech, right to bear arms, freedom to not have your government just search your home whenever they feel like it, those sort of things. And that's really what the true platform of the Republican Party is. And if you read our state party published platform, it greatly represents that. Matter of fact, I can't really think of many things that aren't represented on that.
Now, and that's a way to show the voter when you get on that primary ballot what you stand for, right? That R means something. It has significance to it. And a way to contrast it to the D on the ballot, right?
On the primary ballot, the voters believe that is the case.
Yes.
It is not always the case with people with an R behind their name. And I think that's the crux of what you're bringing up today.
Yes. Okay. And I want to make the argument in my district, by any measurement, my senator that's been there 20 some years is not a Republican. Judy Lee does not vote in the manner in which the Republican platform shows. And my district has an issue with that. And that's the reason we see challenges in my district. And I think that's the right of my district to, if we're upset with our candidate, that we can bring a challenge to the table, but there has to be a legitimate fight. And that happens at the primary. And you get on the primary one of two ways. The district either endorses you or you get enough signatures to get on the primary, right? So we've reached the primary ballot. We're sitting there in June and we're waiting for the voters to make a decision. Ben is educating me and hopefully you on the process of being a legislator and getting on a ballot. Ben, we left off with the primary versus district endorsement. Incumbents are facing challenges in many of the districts at increased level because of an increased level of grassroots involvement. In my mind, this is something that should be celebrated. As Jefferson said, a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. There's no reason we should not want as many people involved as possible. Where do you come down on this increased participation at district levels?
I'm glad you brought that quote into the mix because I'm a big believer in participating at your district level and actually going out there and saying, okay, I'm going to go to my district convention. I'm going to get as many people informed and involved as I can. And then we're going to go talk to the candidate that wants to go run for reelection and the one that wants to challenge them and find out what we believe. I think the biggest issue that some will say when you get to the primary side of this coin is that they want to have the masses be included. And I think it's very different in the primary than it is in an endorsement convention, because at an endorsement convention, the district party has the ability to disqualify somebody who's not a Republican, who doesn't believe in Republican values, who isn't a member of the party, things of that nature. So they basically can say Republicans are endorsing Republicans, and we know who they are. In the primary, it's much different. And I think that's where we see that the mass populace is not an informed populace as much as they used to be. And that's sad because I think it's everybody's responsibility. If they're going to exercise their right to vote, they better be well informed, and many are not. And so we've got the fact that some choose not to be well informed. And then we also allow Democrats, independents, libertarians, Green Party people, and everybody else to vote on the Republican ballot in the primary. They're not Republicans. So if I'm going to run on a platform and I want the like-minded people to support me in my party, I would really like it to only be the members of my party that participate.
Now, there's a time when there was 15, 20 people back when I went to in the Tea Party days. There might have been even 7 people at a district nominating convention, endorsing convention. Now you might see upwards of 70, 100. Some might even be seeing 200 out west. Ben, does it intimidate you at all to make your argument for why you should serve when there's 6 times as many people in the audience and you have to convince them? It shouldn't be, but does it intimidate some?
I think it's predominantly intimidating if you don't know who your audience is. If you think that somebody just packed the room with people that like one guy and you'll never see them again, that happened in District 13 not too long ago, speaking of your district, where a longtime legislator did not get endorsed, and it wasn't on any Republican principle whatsoever. It was the fact that the newcomer who wanted to challenge him, basically on the basis of being too principled, too conservative, too much of a Republican, and too much unlike your senator that you referenced earlier. And instead, that individual was not endorsed because the people that came in, nobody really even verified if they were truly Republicans or believed in that or would ever show up again. And so it really can go both ways in an endorsing convention the way we do them now. And a lot of it depends on who's in control of the district chair seat and the executive committee.
If you look at that argument, take it to a national level. So Trump is in the midterms here where we have midterm elections in November. If we're saying we don't want participation, that's saying you don't want motivation. Look how it's going to harm Trump in November if there's not a motivated grassroots people willing to walk over glass to go vote for him. You know what I mean? And that applies at the local level too, right?
Absolutely. And I think when you bring the presidential position up, you look at how we do presidential primaries and caucuses. We've done both in our state, but they're run by the party. They're not run by the nonpartisan state government. So this nonpartisan state government in our legislative primaries says, we're going to take your party, we're going to open up your party to the public, and then we're going to replace who you want with the member the public chooses, even though they may not be part of your party. We don't do that on the presidential one. On the presidential one, it's run by the NDGOP when they come to North Dakota. So Trump or anybody else that's running for president knows that they're going to speak to an audience of Republican membership. You actually have to be members of the party to participate. That if we went to that in North Dakota, I would be a lot more a believer in our primary process because we would know who the people were. But to just say that anybody under the sun can participate in narrowing who the Republicans pick, it's just silly.
The truth is, way too many incumbents want as little grassroots activity as possible because it makes it easier if they just pack the room with their people. There are some incumbents who were once endorsed by their districts and loved that endorsement and then now are against it because they may not win that endorsement. Isn't this just blatant opportunism?
Absolutely. That's what you just described there has nothing to do with the grassroots being involved or not. I think that's just looking at statistics and saying, am I more likely to win this way or am I more likely to win that way? Or if I do the first thing and it doesn't work out, like the endorsing process, do I just go to the primary anyway and challenge because I'm so smart, much smarter than the members of my district? And so it really is an elitist point of view. And it's very opportunistic if you're just playing both sides against the middle.
If you have a less motivated district, isn't there a chance also? I maybe not in our state, but let's look at generally, you have a much greater chance in a less motivated district of having the opposite party being elected, right?
Absolutely. Anything can happen. And the less people that are involved and are more importantly engaged, the less your message is going to get out and the less principled people are going to be elected to these positions or at least moved on beyond the primary to run in the general election.
You made the point earlier, and it brings up a contrast I find interesting. So in the legislature, once you're elected, you're fine having dictates made by your party leadership, the House chair or whatever. I don't know what you guys call them in the North Dakota, the Senate chair or the Senate leader or whatever your names are for them. But when you get to the district level, you don't want any grassroots. So you want it top down. The legislators, the incumbent's fine with top down. He just doesn't want bottom up. You see my dilemma there?
I do. And I actually, from a personal level, really value the bottom up involvement. And what many people think is that they don't need to or they shouldn't come out to Bismarck and give us their thoughts when the legislation is happening. And I would say that's a much more bully microphone than even coming up to a district meeting because they get to tell the world what they think about that issue when they come to a committee meeting. There is not as much acceptance of top down as you might think from our leadership. But when the leadership is in power, they can force their agenda to some degree. And there's enough people in the legislature that haven't made the decision to be independent-minded legislators. Some put in much less time than others in terms of working on legislation. And so some are just happy to appease leadership so that they can maybe get the appointment to a committee that they want, or they can seem popular, or maybe they'll get an award from the Chamber of Commerce for giving away more of the people's money to business or something. And that's what they value. Those of us that don't value that, a lot of times are going against the current, not to be obstructionist, but just tell me why I should support what you just said we should support as the leader. Why should I follow it? Where does that fit into our platform? And they look at me like I'm from Mars or I have a purple dot on my forehead or something. And then it's, what does the platform have to do with the legislature? And that's where your real breakdown is.
Great points. Politics is the art of persuasion, but these new district members may not be so easily swayed. Rather than stand up and make a winning argument within the district, many incumbents are making the decision now to skip the district endorsement process and go straight to the primary. Doing this is certainly their legal right, but in my mind, they can't have it both ways and still run as a Republican on the ballot. How do you feel about this? I think they still get to have the R behind their name if they on the primary ballot because they say they're a Republican, even though they weren't endorsed at their district.
That is correct. They just claim that they are a Republican and they're on as a Republican. So you could have former Senator Kent Conrad, who was a Democrat, longtime Democrat senator from North Dakota, come in and get a few hundred signatures and say, now I'm running as a Republican in District 16, where I'm from, for the North Dakota legislature. And nothing stops that. There's no membership required. So last session, I had proposed a bill that suggested that the primary would be used solely if districts failed to endorse candidates. So it would have put more onus on the endorsing process, and it would have made the primary more of a footnote in the process. That's just one idea on how we could fix it. Another idea would be if we got voter registration, and you at least had to be a registered Republican to participate in the Republican primary. That's one version. I think the version that would even be better than that is that they had to verify party membership. So if you wanted to participate in the Republican primary and pick the Republican candidate, maybe you should actually be a Republican yourself. And it only costs, I believe, $50 to become a Republican every year. So if people really care about the process and want to pick the candidate, they could pay $50 and participate in that through that process. And if they don't want to pay the money, they're still feel free to vote for a Republican or a Democrat or anybody else in the general election. It's just who's going to be the party's candidate. That really should be left only to Republicans.
To the party, yeah. You get, in that case, you can have a Judy Lee going to the primary, putting an R behind her name, which I entirely feel is false advertising. It's just, if anybody can, it's like racism, Ben. If everybody's a racist, then nobody is. If everybody's a Republican because you say you are, then nobody is. There's got to be something that attaches to it. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. And it needs to be more than just what room do you meet in for caucus. There's got to be some thread of principle that holds that party together.
Ben's doing a great job answering all my questions. Ben, I saw a quote by a fellow legislator of yours that said he doesn't need a district to tell him whether he's Republican or not. My answer to him is, dude, you got Judy Lee in your party. Evidently, Republican can mean all sorts of things. It's so vague that it's almost unlimited. It has no weight to it. Republican, when you say that word, it has to mean something to your audience, right?
It should mean something to your audience. And I believe the word does mean something to our audience, but they see the branding from a national level and think that brand should apply all the way down to a legislative level. And in reality, in North Dakota, we absorbed the Democratic Party, or at least a portion of the Democratic Party that could win an election over the last 20 years. There is virtually no Democratic Party left, and those that would have been Democrats are now have an R behind their name because it's more convenient to win. So I think what the inner battle that we're dealing with within the party is, how do we get back to narrowing, or if you might say, thinning out the number of people that are in the party so that we only have Republicans left. And I think that's what you're suggesting, is some of the people that are more left-leaning within our party 25, 30 years ago would have ran as Democrats, and they would have been lauded as Democrats. And sometimes people say, where have all the what they feel as common sense Democrats gone, which are ones that are more toward the middle than what we have left in our state now, which are far left Democrats. They say, where have they all gone? And I said, they came across the street and they're in our building. They're in our party.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know how you identify who's Republican in North Dakota anymore based simply on the R.
I made the point in past shows, if you took some of these legislators and had them run in a blue state, they would run as Democrats because that's the easier way to win. They use the R as a blanket to get elected in North Dakota, only as coverage, because that's what you have to do in North Dakota to win. If it was a blue state, if they were in Minnesota, they would be Democrats.
I think that's a good point. I think you're probably spot on with that. And I think that what's really interesting is watch people run away from broad scorecards or things of that nature of their legislative behavior. I'll be the first to say, I could write a scorecard to say anything you want. So you can't just take one scorecard and say that's the be all end all. But I've noticed some individuals in the legislature, particularly, that run away from pretty much all scorecards. They might point to a good rating with the NRA. I've got a pretty good NRA rating. They might say, I vote pro-life. Two very important issues within the party. But then if the rest of your politics is I vote for basically socialism for corporations, that's not really Republican. If I vote to not return money when I have excess money back to the people, or if I do return a little bit, it's maybe 10% of the excess money, and I decide to quote unquote invest the other 90% into something that isn't necessary for government to do. We're not talking bricks and mortar highways here. We're talking some blue sky economic development. Some of it's loans that'll never be forgiven. We had a fertilizer plant a couple of years ago that I just tried to get them to remove one line in the description that said they had to use, it may not make sense in this context, but they had to use the electrolysis of water to develop their fertilizer. Only one particular entity used that technology to create the fertilizer. So you might have attracted any number of companies to put a fertilizer plant where we desperately needed in North Dakota, but we narrowly tailored it so that just one company could qualify. And we have this thing in the Constitution called the gifting clause, and we violate it all the time. In some days, probably dozens of times on the same day in Bismarck. The Constitution isn't written wrong. We shouldn't be able to say this money is for Perry Schmacher, and that's the only person that can get it in this bill. That would not sound right. But when we say this money's only for a gentleman who's on this particular show and has a banner behind his head that says open range, we're saying the same thing. And that's done all the time in Bismarck, and it's something that many of us find very concerning.
There's lots of grading systems out there right now that people are, and you're right. You need to look at them in the aggregate, but they are. If you look at all of them, they're going to show a mean, right?
Right.
It's going to give you a sense of your legislator. I want to move to another topic. So running for the legislature is not a simple decision. It takes time, like you said. Not everybody can do it. You got to have a certain type of job, things like that. When a person wants to challenge, that shouldn't be taken lightly by the incumbent. A serious decision was made. We're talking about the norm, right? Not a personal vendetta or something like that. But that person, the challenger, made a serious decision, a weighted decision on whether they thought they were the better candidate. There has to be some legitimacy to that, right? Given to that. The same decision you made when you decided to run.
There is, and that legitimacy is borne out in an endorsing convention process where you're with your district. If you just show up and say, I'm running because I think I'm awesome, and you're running against an incumbent that the district thinks did a good job with and follows some principled level of leadership, that person that's the challenger is not going to have a chance to win that endorsement because they're not going to have made a good point why the incumbent should be replaced. I think it's a little different in the primary where we don't have debates like the presidential candidates. We don't have that sort of a level where everybody can turn on the television and see the difference. Yeah, during the general election, they'll have forums and things that compare Republicans and Democrats against each other. But in the primary, it's been very rare where we've actually had dialogue or a process where you could say, I liked candidate A's answer better than candidate B's answer when they both come from Republicans. And that's the beauty of the endorsing process. People have the ability to ask those questions. And they can put you on the spot and they can hold your feet to the fire. It's just that the value of those endorsements has been cheapened by the use of the primary as a second bite at the apple.
I think if you look at absolutes and you said only incumbents or always challengers and incumbents, you're better off with the always challenging an incumbent because iron sharpens iron and you're going to get the final answer can't just be it's either the incumbent or a Democrat. There has to be competition is good, and we have to get back to that. And I think that's part of our problem as for an entire generation. There just isn't any competition because they think it's their birthright. Do you agree? It can't just be, I get this job until I'm bored or die, or else you have to vote for a Democrat.
No, that's absolutely true. And I think in our process, we have plenty of opportunity to challenge that concept of this seat belongs to me until I choose to give it up. But I think that the seat should belong to the district in the case of a legislative race, and the district should have the opportunity to ask tough questions, and the incumbent should be required to submit to those tough questions.
Okay, so now I think we've set the issues facing the legislative districts. It's chicken or egg, though, for the Republican Party, meaning we're back to district endorsing or primary, getting on the primary ballot through signatures. Let's talk solutions to this chicken or egg situation we're in. Do you think the more local the races, the more direct involvement a citizen should have?
Well, I think so. Yes. I think that makes a lot of sense because the citizen is going to care about the issues closest to home the most. Now, I do talk to some citizens, and they're all worried about either the Second Amendment or pro-life issues. They might not bring anything up that affects them uniquely in their city or town, but I think by them bringing what they talk about at the dining room table to that meeting to discuss with you, it's a unique opportunity to represent them in a way that maybe you couldn't represent them if you never heard from them.
You're one of a few thousand rather than one of several 100,000 or million. So there is,
Right.
whether it's your school board, your county commission, the closer they are to the locality, the more effect you can have by being involved. Do you think this is a true or mostly true statement? The more involvement in a district that a district has, the more conservative it usually is. The members are. Is that mostly a true statement in your mind?
Within our party, I believe that's true. Now, there are some exceptions where districts have really worked hard to keep people out of their district organization, where they maybe control the district chairmanship and they try to play games with when you have to pay dues or you can't vote or things of that nature. There is some gamesmanship that does keep those conservatives away. But when you hear of large turnouts and endorsing conventions anywhere in our state where that's north of 100 people, it's almost always a large number of conservatives in the room.
I saw a quote by, I call him our Chuck Todd of North Dakota, in the newspaper this week, where he says radicals were recent. He always calls any conservative radical, and the traditional Republican is just a fancy name for not Democrat, right? He likes the traditional Republican versus the radical. Ben, do you think I'm radical?
No, I don't see you as being radical. And I also don't see you as being populist. I see you as being an interested person that wants the best for their district.
Just wants the best. Yes, that's right. Folks, you've done an excellent job so far. I got lots of questions for you, many more to get to. So we're going to get right to it. Law is law. So the solution to this problem cannot be to eliminate the primary, right? That is in the Constitution, right?
No, the way we handle the primary is not in the Constitution. It's in statute. And that's why you saw two bills last session that would have altered the process of how the primary is done. One that I feel would have been very damaging to our process, and one that I think would have actually restored the way things used to be with local party involvement. Both bills failed in the end. And I actually suggested that the second bill fail, even the one I liked, just because I thought that the damage that it was doing during last session was not worth the effort on keeping the bill alive. But in context, I think there is a lot of that we could do to improve the primary, whether it be voter registration, party membership, verification. There are probably others.
Appreciate you correcting me. If we agree that a more involved citizen is a good thing, is it possible to change the number of signatures required to get on the ballot if not endorsed by the political party?
Absolutely. That, again, is just a statutory change we could create. We can make you not eligible for the primary if you aren't endorsed. We can make you get the same number of signatures as it takes people to win in November. We can do anything in between. So whatever the legislature or an initiated measure would decide would govern that.
Now, is it currently like 1% at a district of the last number of people that voted or something like that?
That sounds, it's either 1 or 2%, something like that. It sounds about right. In the more urban districts that have larger voter turnout, I think it ranges between 300 and 600. But in some districts, it could be even less than that.
Okay. Any solution cannot ignore the self-preservation instincts of the incumbent. Incumbents will never vote for their own demise, meaning term limits, because they are political animals, not George Washington's. Their attitude is, you're going to have to pry my seat out of my cold, dead hands. How can we have a citizen government if the citizen is cut out from serving? Because it's darn near impossible to be an incumbent, especially at a federal level. It may be possible at a district level, but if you're cutting out the citizen, how do you have a citizen government?
We do have term limits for the legislature in North
Wow.
Dakota,
Yeah.
and they're going to start actually showing up in 2 years. That's when the first wave of that will have effect. I personally don't like the way the term limits work in North Dakota because they're lifetime bans, and so you're limited to 8 years in the legislature, in the House of Representatives, for example, for your entire life. So I don't know if there's enough people that are willing to do it and will put in the time it takes to be a good legislator if we lifetime ban them at 8 years. However, I will say that having a net turnover is very healthy. And I think that if someday down the road the term limit said you can serve 8 years and then you got to take a break and you can come back later, I'd probably be more supportive of that. And I don't think the incumbent would have the entrenchment in that example.
Now, to be honest, though, the term limits thing came from the citizen. It didn't come from the legislature. It's not like you guys voted for your own.
No, absolutely. That's true. Yeah. And I don't know that, I mean, it was a constitutional amendment and the legislature certainly could have suggested it. But lately, it seems like the legislature will only suggest something that does harm them or tie their hands a little bit if they're worried that people are going to do it anyway. And that's what we saw in a recent special session.
Great point. Do we need a more mature, robust manner of winning district endorsements other than the simple processes of I bring 32 people that like me, you bring 29 people that like you, I win by 3?
One way you could do it is you could simply require people be a member for a period of time. You wouldn't want to do it as a gotcha, though. You'd want to find a way to engage people prior to that deadline. So right now, some districts have a gotcha where they're like, we had to be a member of the party 2 months before the endorsing convention, or you can't participate. But we didn't send the notice out about the meeting till 2 weeks ago or something like that. And so they try to have gotcha like that. But if you truly were cultivating people to be involved in the district the summer before or whatever, and you're constantly out there saying, please join, then I think you could use long-term membership or at least some term of membership before the meeting as a way to make sure that the people are engaged. And if they put that effort in, they're not likely to be swayed on a whim to just support you or just support me because of some past experience. They're going to be engaged in the party business, and that's what we want.
Too many years, well, forever, it just seems to me it's just it's a popularity contest like the prom king or queen, and whoever brings the biggest number. I would just like to see some debates and things like that rather than the candidate goes up there and gives a 3-minute speech and, oh, now I know you're conservative, or you can call yourself whatever you want in 3 minutes, but there's very little challenge of back and forth. I'd just like to see something a little bit more robust. Would you be against that? That would take some effort. You'd have to get some attendance, but it should be a little bit more than a high school prom.
One way you can do it is if you had a deadline in your districts to say, hey, if you want to run for the legislature, you got to let us know 90 days in advance, because we're going to have a series of town halls leading up to that. And so that you're going to have 2 or 3 opportunities to ask the tough questions of both the incumbent and the challenger, or maybe just 2 challengers if there's no incumbent, and then sort it out. And if people had to attend 3 meetings or something like that, I also think it would lessen the popularity contest, because it would mean that you're invested in the process. I hope that would work.
And then you could get some information honestly in local newspapers. That would be interesting.
And maybe if one of the candidates doesn't attend the town halls to be questioned, then they're not eligible for the endorsement. That seems reasonable.
It just seems to be there needs to be more done there. Has the basically total elimination of the Democratic Party in our state added to grassroots frustration, because it provides a way for too many to run as shepherds but govern as sheep, meaning cloaking themselves in the Republican brand, which the average citizen believes is the platform. So you get to false advertise because you have no competition on the Democrat side. I think you talked a bit about that earlier. I think that is added to district frustration because you have candidates that should be Democrats, but they're running as Republicans.
Absolutely. I mentioned earlier about the Republican Party absorbing the portion of the Democratic Party that actually people would possibly vote for, their electable portion of their party. And the process then is once you've absorbed those individuals, then those individuals fight to broaden the tent, broaden the platform so that they have some footing to stand on, because their core values are not necessarily the values of the Republican Party. So they need to expand that. Just look at the issue of pro-life issue. Now, I've served with some Republicans that are pro-choice Republicans. Well, that's was never really a thing forever in the Republican Party. But as we absorbed a larger number of people, all of a sudden we've got these pro-choice Republicans. And the same can be, you can fill in anything. I'm for common sense gun control. What does that mean? I'm for common sense limiting of your Second Amendment. That was not part of the Republican Party platform, but yet you've got some people that have been melded in or have been absorbed. And all of a sudden there are some that want to limit that. I can't tell you how often I've tried to make it so that elected officials can carry for self-defense. And you should see all the legislators line up to say that's a terrible idea. We should never do that. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure the Second Amendment didn't have that limitation in it. That came from somewhere. Why shouldn't we do this? And we have a super majority of Republicans, like 75 to 80% of both chambers. And yet I can't even get a simple majority to agree that not infringing on the Second Amendment for people who are maybe likely targets of violence because they're elected officials, that happens, to be able to carry throughout their workday.
Who does the knocking on the doors and the hard work of a campaign if the signal is sent that district activism is not wanted unless it is in my favor? It's hard. You know what I mean? You just automatically win because you're an incumbent and people are used to voting R. I mean, it seems like a catch-22 here. You can't ask for district activism to help you go knock on doors if you don't want them to attend the district endorsing convention.
That's a complicated question because the dynamic of the voter is changing. So whereas it used to be that knocking on the doors was a key part to winning an election, and so often now it's just having more money than the other guy. And a lot of the younger generations, they don't necessarily want you knocking on their door, or if you do, they may not answer. They'd rather you send them a Facebook ad or something so they know who's running. And Facebook's probably too old-fashioned for a lot of the young people. But that's the dynamic that we have now. And I fear that in 20 years, there won't be any need to go to door because that generation won't be the predominant voter anymore. So I think the incumbents have been allowed to get away with not engaging the public and going off of name recognition built on money and advertising.
To end the conversation tonight, Ben, I'm frustrated with the process. What is your frustration level 1 to 10, endorsing versus the primary, getting on the primary signatures? Do you see some frustration there in the party?
I think my frustration levels where it has been for a while at maybe somewhere at a 6 or 7. I'm not ready to burn everything down like some are. I think there's constructive things we can do, but we've got to be diligent. We got to keep trying to make it better.
Folks, we thank you for watching tonight. Ben, I really appreciate you coming in and answering all these questions. Hopefully it clarifies some things for the viewers.